Hello and welcome to Whisper Garden, a quiet corner of YouTube where gentle stories help you slow down, unwind, and drift off to sleep. Every Tuesday and Thursday you'll find a new sleepy time tale, told in soft, soothing tones designed to calm your mind and ease you into restful slumber. If my stories bring you peace or help you rest, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps more dreamers like you find their way here. Sweet dreams. Our story for tonight is called The Sky Archivist, a gentle tale of dreams, starlight, and a quiet journey from the clouds to a child who no longer dreams. Chapter 1. Missing Light. The archive existed in a realm of silence and perpetual dawn. Shelves of impossibly delicate crystal stretched beyond sight in every direction, each holding thousands upon thousands of glowing jars. Inside each jar floated a dream, not as substance or liquid, but as pure distilled experience. The archivist moved through this expanse with soundless steps. Their form was neither solid nor vapor, but something in between, a constant state of becoming. Silver-white robes shimmered as they drifted between the towering shelves, fingers leaving trails of stardust in their wake. Tonight, though time held little meaning here, the archivist performed their ritual as they had for countless cycles before. They stood before an ornate table of cloud marble, where instruments of celestial bronze and moonstone waited. A giant astrolabe hung suspended above, its gears turning imperceptibly, mapping the sleep patterns of every dreaming being below. With practiced precision, the archivist consulted their ledger, a book bound in material that shifted between iridescent fabric and liquid light. Names appeared on its pages not in letters, but in unique constellations of tiny stars, patterns as distinct as fingerprints. The archivist's eyes, multifaceted like a dragonfly's but colorless as diamond, scanned the patterns. Sector 7, Earth rotation 8492, Dreamer designation. Nico, they whispered, their voice the sound of distant wind chimes. The archivist extended their hand, and the vast archive responded. Shelves rotated, shifted, rearranged. The very air seemed to fold upon itself, bringing a specific section forward until it hovered before them. The archivist's fingers danced across the jars, each touch causing them to illuminate brighter, pulses of light, flickering in response. But when they reached the space where Nico's dream should be, their hand passed through emptiness. The archivist blinked. They checked the ledger again, then looked back at the empty space on the shelf. Every being dreamed. It was fundamental, like gravity or time. Dreams needed to be collected, preserved, catalogued. An empty space was impossible. The archivist reached for a slim rod of silver. With a flick of their wrist, it elongated into a staff topped with a crystal sphere. They tapped it gently against the empty space, and the air rippled like disturbed water. Images flickered through the disturbance. A small bedroom, rumpled sheets, a child sleeping. But where there should have been a glowing aura of dreamlight surrounding the sleeper, there was nothing. Just darkness and still air. Anomaly, they murmured, and the word echoed strangely, as if it had never before been spoken in the archive. The archivist placed their staff upon the table and moved to a curved wall of glass that separated the archive from the cosmos beyond. Through it, Earth shimmered below, a blue-green jewel wrapped in clouds. They pressed their palm against the glass, feeling the cool, impossibly thin barrier between realms. In all their existence, the archivist had never descended. Their purpose was to observe, to collect, to preserve, not to interfere. But an absence where there should be presence disturbed the patterns that maintained the archive's perfect balance. They returned to their instruments and consulted another device, a series of nested glass orbs that spun in opposite directions. The archivist adjusted knobs of pearl, causing the orbs to realign. The innermost sphere revealed a closer view of the town where Nico slept. "Analysis!" they commanded. Words formed in the air around them, written in symbols that constantly shifted and rearranged. Dreamer, Nico, age 7, Earth years, location, coastal settlement, Northern Hemisphere. Anomaly detected, dream absence, duration, 43 nights, causation, unknown, precedence, none. The archivist's brow furrowed slightly, the first expression to cross their serene features in what might have been centuries. They waved a hand and the archive dimmed around them, all light flowing toward the empty spot on the shelf, illuminating the absence even more starkly. "I must understand," the archivist said. They moved to a cabinet carved from what appeared to be solidified moonlight. Inside hung garments unlike their usual attire, heavier, more substantial. The archivist selected a cloak woven from mist and morning light, designed to fold their ethereal form into something that could exist, however briefly, in the density of Earth. As they fastened the clasp, a tiny star caught in amber, the weight of it settled uncomfortably across their shoulders. Already they could feel the pull of gravity, the thinning of their perceptions. The archivist approached a circular platform inscribed with celestial maps. They stepped onto it, and the maps began to glow beneath their feet. With a final glance at the troubling empty space on the shelf, they raised their hands. The platform descended, breaking through the floor of the archive like a stone through water. The archivist closed their eyes as they passed through layers of cosmos, atmosphere, cloud. Their form compressed, condensed, became almost solid. The sensation was foreign, uncomfortable, like being slowly encased in honey. Around them, stars blurred into streaks of light as they fell earthward, wrapped in their cloak of mist, guided by the pull of the anomaly, the curious case of the child who no longer dreamed. Chapter 2. Heavy Air, Quiet Streets. The archivist's descent ended in stillness. They stood on solid ground for the first time, the sensation strange and unsettling beneath their feet. Dawn was just breaking over the small coastal town, painting the sky in hues they had only observed from afar, coral pink, bleeding into amber, then pale blue. The archivist's eyes, accustomed to the pure white-gold light of the archive, struggled to process the richness of colour. But it was the heaviness that truly disoriented them. Everything here had substance, weight, presence. The air itself pressed against their newly solidified form, thick with moisture from the nearby sea and carrying countless scents: salt, soil, something sweet and yeasty from a nearby building, the sharp green of new leaves. The archivist's senses, designed to detect the subtle patterns of dreams, were overwhelmed by the barrage of earthly information. They took a tentative step forward, their foot meeting concrete with an unfamiliar impact. Sound vibrated through them, a gull's cry overhead, the distant rhythm of waves, a mechanical rumble from somewhere down the street. Each sensation arrived separately, then all at once, making the archivist pause to steady themselves against a lamppost. The metal felt cold beneath their fingers. Another new sensation. In the archive, nothing was truly cold or truly warm. Temperature was merely information, not experience. Here, the morning chill pressed against their skin, making it tighten and prickle. As the archivist oriented themselves, the town began to wake. Lights appeared in windows. A door opened, and a man stepped out onto a small porch, a steaming cup in hand. He wore rumpled clothes and stared unseeing at the street as he sipped his drink, lost in thought. The archivist observed him, fascinated by the lines on his face, the way his breath fogged slightly in the cool morning air, the small movements of his throat as he swallowed. The man couldn't see the archivist, of course. The cloak of mist ensured that. But the archivist could see him, not just his outer form, but the faint aurora of recent dreams still clinging to him. Last night he had dreamed of flying, of a childhood home, of someone he had loved and lost. The dreams were fading now as wakefulness took hold, but the archivist could still read their patterns. their emotional resonance. They moved on, drifting down the street. A woman emerged from another house, calling to a small dog that bounded ahead of her, its energy vibrating through the air. In another home, through an open window, the archivist glimpsed a woman braiding a young girl's hair, their movements synchronized in a dance of gentle intimacy. Somewhere the smell of burning toast mixed with laughter. The archivist absorbed it all, trying to catalogue and process. Humans began their days wrapped in the remnants of their dreams, carrying them forward into waking life, often unaware of how these night visions colored their perceptions, their emotions. It was beautiful and chaotic, like watching thousands of overlapping ripples on a pond's surface. Following an invisible thread of intuition, the archivist moved toward the eastern edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the sea came into full view. Here they found a 3-story house painted pale yellow, its balconies draped with climbing plants not yet in bloom. On the highest balcony stood a small figure, still as a statue, gazing upward at the fading stars. Nico. The archivist drifted closer, studying the child. They were small for their 7 years, with dark curls that caught the early light. Their pajamas were slightly too large, sleeves rolled up several times at the wrists. The child's face was calm, composed, but their eyes, the archivist had never seen such eyes from the distance of the archive. They were deep brown, almost black, and held a stillness that seemed impossibly old. Most striking was what the archivist couldn't see. Where every other human they had passed radiated the soft, fading glow of dreams, cobweb-thin filaments of light that gradually dissolved into the day, Nico had nothing. No residual dream light, no lingering emotional patterns. It was as if the child existed in a perfect void, untouched by the subconscious world that should have enveloped them during sleep. As the archivist watched, Nico's gaze shifted from the sky to the ocean. The child's expression didn't change, but their small hands tightened on the balcony railing. Below, a voice called from within the house, a woman's voice, gentle but insistent. Nico turned and disappeared inside without a sound. The archivist remained, troubled by what they had witnessed, or rather, by what was missing. In the archive, they had encountered every imaginable type of dream, nightmares that twisted and writhed in their jars, healing dreams that pulsed with soft green light, prophetic dreams with their distinctive golden threads. But they had never encountered the absence of dreams. Not like this. Not a natural dreamlessness, but something that felt chosen, deliberate. A seagull landed on the railing where Nico had stood. It turned its head, seeming to look directly at the archivist with one bright eye before taking flight again. The archivist watched it soar toward the ocean and felt something unfamiliar stir within them, a heaviness that had nothing to do with Earth's gravity, a tightness in their chest that hadn't been there before. They didn't have a word for this sensation. In the archive, emotions were merely patterns to be observed in dreams, not experiences to be felt. But here, watching the small, empty space where Nico had stood, the archivist felt the first stirrings of what humans called sorrow. Chapter 3. The Flower Shop. The archivist followed Nico through the morning routine, remaining unseen as the child ate breakfast in silence, across from a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. This was the aunt, the archivist realized, observing the similarities in their features, the same dark curls, though the woman's were streaked with silver, the same shape to their mouths. But where Nico was still, the aunt was motion, hands constantly busy, voice filling the quiet spaces, eyes checking and rechecking her nephew, as if reassuring herself of his presence. "Finish your toast, love," she said, pouring herself more coffee. "Bus comes in 15 minutes. Nico nodded, taking small, methodical bites. A notebook lay open beside the plate, its margins filled with tiny drawings of stars and spirals. "Mrs. Chen says you're doing well with math," the aunt continued. "That's wonderful. You're—" She hesitated almost imperceptibly. Your dad was good with numbers too. Nico's hand paused, hovering over the notebook. For a moment, something flickered across the child's face, a ripple disturbing still water. Then it was gone. The aunt didn't seem to notice as she gathered dishes, checked the clock, searched for keys. Soon they were walking together down the sloping streets toward the center of town. The archivist drifted behind them, observing how Nico's small hand remained in the aunt's grasp, but without gripping back, how the child's eyes continually drifted upward to the sky. At the school gates, the aunt knelt down, adjusting Nico's jacket collar. "I'll be at the shop all day. Come straight there after school, all right?" Nico nodded. "I love you," she said, and kissed the top of Nico's head. Nico's lips formed the words, "Love you too," but no sound emerged. The aunt smiled anyway and stood, watching as Nico walked through the gates without looking back. The archivist observed Nico throughout the school day, fascinated by this world of small humans, learning in unison. In classrooms, Nico sat perfectly still, while other children fidgeted and whispered. When called upon, Nico answered correctly but briefly, voice barely audible. During breaks, while others played in noisy groups, Nico sat alone beneath a tree, drawing stars in that same notebook. No teachers seemed concerned. The archivist heard one whisper to another. "Still processing, poor thing." "It's only been 2 months," the other nodded sagely. "Children are resilient. Give it time." When school ended, Nico followed the aunt's instructions, walking directly to the town centre. The flower shop sat on a corner, its windows steamed from the interior warmth, its entrance framed by buckets of fresh blooms. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Clara's Blossoms," in flowing script. As Nico entered, a bell jingled overhead. The aunt, Clara, emerged from behind an arrangement of lilies, her hands green-stained, a pair of clippers in her apron pocket. "There you are," she said brightly. "Perfect timing. Mrs. Patterson just ordered a dozen table arrangements for her daughter's engagement dinner. Want to help me pick out the flowers?" Nico nodded, setting down the school backpack and moving to a workbench in the rear of the shop. The archivist followed, passing through the doorway with a slight shiver. The shop's interior was a riot of sensory information, colours more vivid than any the archivist had yet encountered, scents layering and mingling in complex harmonies, humidity that made the air even heavier than outside. But beyond these immediate impressions, the shop held something else, something the archivist could almost taste. Life. Not just in the flowers themselves, though they pulsed with it, but in the space itself. This room had been loved and lived in. Memories had been made here, layer upon layer, year after year. Clara worked steadily, her movements efficient, but never hurried. She positioned Nico at the work table, demonstrating how to trim stems at an angle under running water. As she worked, she talked about customers who had visited that day, about the new shipment of tulips arriving tomorrow, about plans for the weekend. Nico listened, nodding occasionally, helping when instructed, but otherwise remaining in that same strange stillness. Yet there was a subtle difference here, the archivist noticed. In the shop, surrounded by flowers and with hands busy with simple tasks, some of the tension in Nico's small shoulders eased slightly. The afternoon passed. Customers came and went. Clara managed it all, taking orders, making change, offering advice about which blooms lasted longest, which combinations complemented each other. Between customers, she returned to the workbench where Nico had begun independently assembling a small arrangement of white daisies and lavender sprigs. "That's lovely," Clara said, genuine admiration in her voice. "You've got a good eye, just like—" Again that fractional hesitation. "You've got a good eye." As evening approached, the shop quieted. Clara began the closing routine, counting the register, recording the day's sales in a worn ledger, sweeping flower clippings from the floor. Nico sat at the workbench, no longer arranging flowers but drawing in the ever-present notebook. The archivist drifted closer, curious. The page was filled with familiar shapes, jars and vessels of different designs, some emitting beams of light, some containing what looked like tiny stars. Between these drawings were careful renderings of clouds, moons, and constellations. The archivist froze, staring at the drawings. These weren't random imaginings, they were accurate depictions of the archive's storage vessels. How could Nico know these shapes, these specific designs? No human had ever seen the archive, let alone its collection methods. Unless... A new possibility dawned on the archivist. Dreams weren't just experiences to be collected and preserved, they were connections, bridges between realms. Was it possible that before the dream stopped, Nico had somehow glimpsed the archive through dreams, had seen the archivists themselves at work? The bell over the door jingled one final time as Clara locked up. "Ready for dinner?" she asked Nico, who nodded and carefully closed the notebook. The archivist noticed Clara glance at the drawings, a flash of concern crossing her features before she smiled and held out her hand. They climbed the narrow staircase behind the shop to a small apartment above. Like the shop below, this space was warm and lived in, if somewhat cramped. Plants occupied every windowsill. Books filled mismatched shelves. A tabby cat greeted them with a languid stretch before following them to the kitchen. As Clara prepared a simple meal, Nico set the table without being asked. The routine was clearly established, movements choreographed through repetition. They ate together at a small round table beside a window that faced west, the setting sun painting the room gold. "Did you dream last night?" Clara asked casually, too casually, as she served a second helping of pasta. Nico shook their head, eyes fixed on the plate. "That's okay," Clara said, though something in her voice suggested it wasn't, not entirely. "Dr. Lee said it might take time for your dreams to come back." Nico looked up then, meeting Clara's eyes directly. "I don't want them to come back," they said, the words clear and deliberate, the longest sentence the archivist had heard from them all day. Clara set down her fork. "Nico." "Dreams are just memories," Nico continued, voice growing softer. "And I don't want to remember anymore. It hurts too much." Clara reached across the table, covering Nico's small hand with her own. "I know it hurts, love. I miss him too, every day." Nico pulled away, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "Can I be excused?" Clara nodded, watching as Nico carried their plate to the sink, then disappeared down the short hallway to their bedroom. When the door closed, Clara remained at the table, her own meal forgotten. She pressed her hands to her face briefly, took a deep breath, then rose and began clearing the rest of the dishes, her movements now lacking their usual rhythm. The archivist, however, followed Nico. The child's bedroom was small but comfortable, with a bed beneath the window, a shelf of books and walls covered in drawings, more stars, clouds, and now the archivist could see many depictions of what were unmistakably the archive's jars, rendered in coloured pencil and crayon. Nico sat on the bed, knees drawn up, looking out at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Then, reaching beneath the pillow, they withdrew a different notebook, older and more worn than the school one. Opening it carefully, Nico flipped through pages filled with more detailed drawings of the archive, not just jars but the celestial instruments, the shelves extending into infinity, and in one corner, partially erased but still visible, a figure with flowing robes and eyes like diamonds. The archivist's own form, unmistakably rendered. Nico stared at this drawing for a long moment before taking a pencil and deliberately shading over it, obscuring the figure further. Then, whispering so quietly that even the archivist had to strain to hear, Nico addressed the drawing. "I don't want to see it again. It hurts too much." In that moment, the archivist understood. Nico had indeed seen the archive through dreams, but what they had glimpsed wasn't just the collection of dreams, but the preservation of memories. And among those memories was one too painful to revisit, the memory of the lost parent. Nico wasn't experiencing ordinary dreamlessness. They were actively refusing to dream, somehow managing to close themselves off from that entire realm of experience, a self-imposed exile from the world the archivist tended. As Clara came to tuck Nico into bed, the archivist retreated to the window, processing this revelation. They watched as the aunt kissed the child goodnight, adjusted the blankets, left a small light burning in the corner. When Clara had gone, Nico turned toward the window, eyes wide open, deliberately fighting sleep, staring at the stars until exhaustion finally overcame determination. Even in sleep, the archivist observed, Nico maintained that strange emptiness, no flicker of dreamlight, no movement beneath the eyelids, no emotional patterns rippling outward, just a perfect protected void. The archivist had come to understand the anomaly but found themselves no closer to resolving it. Dreams were fundamental, their absence created a dangerous imbalance. But how did one convince a child to return to a place that held only pain? As dawn approached, the archivist made an unprecedented decision. They would stay longer, observe more. There was something here they hadn't yet grasped, something about human grief and memory that the archive's perfect, timeless record couldn't capture. They moved to the window, watching as the stars faded and the first pale light touched the sea. Behind them, Nico slept on, dreamless and still, while in the room beyond, the archivist could sense Clara already awake, moving quietly through her morning routine, carrying her own grief like a familiar weight. Chapter 4. Learning Smallness. Days passed, then a week. The archivist remained, observing the rhythms of Earth, of the town, of Nico and Clara's small shared life. Each day followed a similar pattern. Breakfast with few words exchanged, school for Nico, the flower shop for both afterward, quiet evenings above the shop, and nights of dreamless sleep. Yet within this pattern, the archivist began to notice variations, subtleties that would have been impossible to discern from the archive's distant perspective. They noticed how Clara always placed a second cup of tea beside her own in the morning, though she never drank from it. How sometimes she started sentences and didn't finish them, her eyes drifting to a photograph partially hidden behind a plant on the windowsill, a man with Nico's eyes and Clara's smile. How she occasionally paused in the middle of arranging flowers, hands going still, before taking a deep breath and continuing. They noticed how Nico watched other children at play but never joined in, how the child's teachers exchanged concerned glances when they thought no one was looking, how one particularly kind librarian always saved astronomy books for Nico's weekly visit. Most of all, the archivist noticed the connections, invisible but tangible threads, that linked humans to each other through gestures, words, shared silences. The way Clara always touched Nico's shoulder when passing behind their chair. The way Nico arranged daisies, Clara's favourite flower, in a small vase each afternoon. The way neighbours greeted them by name, offered small kindnesses, carried casseroles to their door with murmured words of continued condolence. The archivist had always understood dreams as individual phenomena, each dreamer a separate entity producing unique patterns. But here on Earth, they began to see how humans existed in constant relationship, their lives overlapping, influencing, supporting each other in ways both profound and mundane. Without quite realizing it, the archivist began to mimic these patterns of connection. When no one was in Nico's bedroom, they would straighten a crooked picture frame, close a drawer left slightly open, place a fallen pencil back on the desk. Once, finding Clara crying silently over the sink, they cooled the air around her slightly, a small comfort on a warm afternoon. When Nico struggled to sleep, fighting to maintain the dreamless void, the archivist hummed a melody with no sound, a vibration felt rather than heard, that eased the child toward rest. These were minor interventions, barely perceptible, yet each one brought a strange satisfaction unlike anything the archivist had known, in their endless work among the archive's shelves. One evening, when Clara was occupied with late paperwork and Nico had gone to bed early, the archivist found themselves drawn to the shop below. In the darkened space, with only moonlight filtering through the windows, the flowers seemed to glow with a subtle inner luminescence. The archivist moved among them, their form less carefully concealed now that no human eyes were present. They touched a lily petal, marveling at its velvet texture. They lifted a spray of lavender to their face, inhaling deeply, analyzing not just the chemical composition of its scent, but the feeling it evoked, a calm alertness, a sense of clean simplicity. They dipped their fingers in the water of a bucket holding roses, feeling the cool liquid part around their skin. Tentatively, the archivist selected a few blooms, a white rose, a sprig of ivy, a stem of tiny blue forget-me-nots. With unpracticed hands, they attempted to arrange them as they had seen Clara do, cutting the stems at angles, positioning them in a small glass vase. The result was asymmetrical, imperfect, nothing like Clara's artistic creations. Yet the archivist felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through their chest as they regarded their handiwork. They had made something small and transient, but real. The archivist left the tiny arrangement on the workbench, wondering if Clara would notice it in the morning, wondering if she would question its appearance. The thought brought another new feeling, anticipation, curiosity about a future moment. As dawn approached, the archivist found themselves drawn to the sea. They walked along the shore while the town slept, watching the waves catch the first light. Here was perpetual motion, endless change within a constant form, so different from the archive's perfect stasis. They stopped to pick up a shell, examining its spiral pattern, the calcified record of a small life lived entirely in water. They held it to their ear, hearing not just the resonance of air, but somehow echoes of the creature that had once inhabited it. They sat on the sand, unconcerned now about their cloak getting damp or slightly dirty. The weight of earth no longer felt so burdensome. Instead, they found themselves appreciating the solidity beneath them, the texture of sand between their fingers, the salt air filling their lungs. They stayed until the sun cleared the horizon, turning the water to hammered gold, before rising and making their way back to the flower shop. Clara was opening for the day, and the archivist slipped in behind a customer. They immediately noticed their small arrangement had been moved to the front counter, positioned near the register. Clara touched it gently as she worked, a puzzled but pleased expression crossing her face whenever her eyes fell upon it. Later that afternoon, when Nico arrived from school, Clara pointed to the arrangement. "What do you think? I found it on the workbench this morning. I don't remember making it yesterday." Nico examined it carefully. "It's pretty," they said, "but different from how you usually do them." Clara nodded. "That's what I thought. Like someone else made it." She smiled. "Maybe we have a flower shop ghost." Nico's eyes widened slightly. "A ghost?" "A friendly one," Clara said, her tone light. "One who arranges flowers and—" She paused, looking around. "And apparently tidied the ribbon drawer. I certainly didn't do that." The archivist had indeed organized the chaotic drawer of ribbon spools the previous evening, unable to resist bringing some order to the colorful tangle. That night, as Nico prepared for bed, the archivist noticed the child standing at the window longer than usual, searching the sky with unusual intensity. When Clara came to say goodnight, Nico asked an unexpected question. "Aunt Clara, do you believe in beings that aren't human?" Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "What kind of beings, love?" "I don't know, like watchers, collectors." Nico's fingers twisted in the bedsheet. "I used to dream about them. Before—" Clara was silent for a moment. "I believe there are many things we don't understand," she said finally. "Many mysteries in the universe. Why do you ask?" Nico shrugged. "Just wondering." They hesitated, then added, In my dreams, they weren't scary. They just watched and kept things safe. The archivist, standing unseen by the bookshelf, felt something twist inside them at these words. They had never considered how their work might appear to the dreamers themselves, had never imagined that a human might retain any awareness of their presence. Clara brushed Nico's hair back from their forehead. Perhaps they're still watching over you, even if you can't see them in dreams anymore. Maybe, Nico said, settling under the covers. After Clara left, Nico remained awake, staring at the ceiling. The archivist moved closer to the bed, studying the child's face. Without fully understanding their own intentions, they reached out, allowing their hand to become just visible enough, a slight shimmer in the darkness, a disturbance in the air that could be dismissed as imagination or moonlight. Nico's breath caught. Their eyes widened, tracking the movement of the archivist's hand. For a brief moment, their gazes seemed to meet across the divide between realms. Then the archivist withdrew, fading back into invisibility. They watched as Nico continued to stare at the spot where the apparition had been, wonder replacing fear in the child's expression. Eventually, Nico's eyes grew heavy, closing, despite apparent efforts to remain awake. The archivist waited until Nico's breathing deepened, then carefully, gently attempted what they had not tried before, entering the child's sleep not to collect a dream, but simply to observe. They extended their consciousness toward Nico's, a light touch meant to assess rather than extract. To their surprise, they felt resistance, not the absolute void of previous nights, but something more complex, a barrier porous but deliberate. Behind it, the archivist sensed not emptiness but containment, dreams and memories carefully walled off, held at bay by sheer force of will. Even as they registered this, the archivist felt themselves being pushed back, not violently but firmly, like hands pressing against their chest. A clear message. Not ready. Not yet. The archivist withdrew, respecting the boundary. They remained beside the sleeping child, contemplating this development. The absolute void had become a guarded border, still closed, but defined now, acknowledged. It was progress of a sort, though toward what end the archivist wasn't certain. Outside, clouds gathered, obscuring the stars. The archivist felt the change in barometric pressure, the subtle shift in the air that preceded rain. Another new experience. Weather, the atmosphere in constant flux. In the archive, conditions never varied. Perfect preservation required perfect stability. But here, change was the only constant. Humans lived within it, adapted to it, sometimes even welcomed it. The archivist found themselves wondering if change might be the key to Nico's situation as well. Not a return to what was before, but a transformation into something new. As rain began to tap against the window, the archivist made another unprecedented decision. They had come to understand the anomaly, but resolution would require more than observation. It would require action, intervention in a way the archivist had never attempted before. Tomorrow, they would try something new. Chapter 5. A Dream Returned. Morning arrived with cleared skies, the rain having washed everything clean. Puddles reflected the blue above, and the air smelled of wet earth and possibility. The archivist followed Nico and Clara through their morning routine, noticing subtle changes in both. Clara humming as she prepared breakfast, Nico responding with more than nods when asked questions. At school, Nico participated slightly more in class, raising a hand once to answer a question about the solar system. During lunch break, when a classmate dropped a book nearby, Nico picked it up and returned it rather than remaining isolated. Small actions, nearly imperceptible shifts, but to the archivist's eyes they glowed like beacons. That afternoon in the flower shop, Nico worked with unusual focus, creating another small arrangement without Clara's guidance. When finished, they placed it near the mysterious one from the day before. For our ghost, Nico explained when Clara raised her eyebrows questioningly. Clara smiled. That's thoughtful. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Later, as evening settled over the town, Nico sat at the small desk in their bedroom, drawing with intense concentration. The archivist moved closer, curious. The page revealed a detailed rendering of the archive as seen from below, clouds parting to reveal endless shelves of glowing vessels, and floating above them, the archivists themselves, arms outstretched, as if in welcome. Nico studied the drawing critically, adding a few more stars around the edges before closing the notebook. Then, in a whisper that seemed directed both nowhere and everywhere, they said, "I saw you last night. I know you're real." The archivist, though invisible, felt exposed, named, known. It was disconcerting and thrilling simultaneously. "I still don't want to dream," Nico continued, voice low but clear. "I don't want to see it again. It hurts too much." Then, with unexpected deliberation, Nico tore the page from the notebook, folded it carefully, and placed it on the windowsill beneath a small stone collected from the beach. An offering, a message. The archivist moved closer, examining the drawing again from this new vantage. Now they could see what had been hidden by the notebook's binding. In a corner of the page, partially obscured by clouds, was a figure. A man, rendered with a child's imperfect skill but unmistakable care. He stood among the archive's endless shelves, one hand reaching toward a specific jar that glowed brighter than the others surrounding it. Understanding bloomed within the archivist. This was Nico's father, not as he had existed in life, but as Nico imagined him now, preserved in the archive like a dream. The child believed that the lost parent's essence, memory, soul, whatever humans called it, was contained within the archivist's collection. And revisiting dreams meant confronting this belief, experiencing anew the pain of separation. As Nico prepared for bed, the archivist remained by the window, thinking deeply. They had come to restore balance, to fix an anomaly. But perhaps the solution wasn't as simple as reactivating Nico's capacity for dreams. Perhaps it required something more fundamental, a change in how those dreams were experienced. When Clara came to tuck Nico in, she noticed the empty space in the notebook, the folded paper on the windowsill. "What's this, love?" she asked, reaching for it. "It's private," Nico said quickly. "It's a message for someone else." Clara's hand paused, then withdrew. "All right," she said, curiosity mingling with concern in her voice. "Secret messages are important." She kissed Nico's forehead. "Sleep well. Night, Aunt Clara." When Clara had gone, Nico lay awake longer than usual, gaze shifting between the ceiling and the folded drawing on the windowsill. Eventually, sleep claimed the child, and once again, the archivist sensed that barrier, less rigid now but still present, still guarded. The archivist moved to the windowsill and gently unfolded the drawing. They studied it for a long time, noting every detail, every line pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the paper. Then, decision made, they folded it again and slipped it into their cloak. With a last glance at the sleeping child, the archivist departed, not just from the room, but from Earth itself, ascending through layers of atmosphere and cloud back to the archive. The transition was jarring after so many days in the density of Earth. The archive's pristine light, once so familiar, now seemed almost harsh, its silence absolute after the constant symphony of earthly sounds. The archivist moved through the endless shelves, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. They approached the table of instruments, now covered in a fine layer of stardust from their absence. With gentle hands they cleared it away, revealing the surfaces beneath, perfect, untouched, eternal. They consulted the ledger, its pages illuminating at their touch. Nico's constellation remained, though now it pulsed with a different rhythm, neither the steady glow of active dreaming nor the void of its absence, but something in between. potential, waiting. The archivist placed Nico's drawing on the table, weighing its corners with small celestial paperweights. Then they reached for tools they had never before used in combination: a silver needle, typically employed for separating tangled dreams, a crystal bowl used to amplify dream echoes, a vial of substance neither liquid nor gas that helped stabilize volatile nightmares. What they planned had never been attempted. The archive was a place of collection and preservation, not creation. The archivist's role was to observe and maintain, not to generate. Yet here they were, preparing to craft something entirely new. They began with the silver needle, using it to extract a tiny fragment of their own experience on Earth, the sensation of morning light on water, the scent of flowers in the shop, the sound of Clara's humming as she worked. This wasn't a dream exactly, but a memory, a lived moment. The fragment glowed faintly silver in the air above the needle's point. The archivist transferred it carefully to the crystal bowl, where it expanded, filling the container with swirling light. Next, they opened a cabinet rarely accessed, containing samples of dreams collected not for preservation, but for study, dreams so unique or powerful that they warranted special attention. From this collection, the archivist selected several: a child's first experience of snow, a gardener's satisfaction at seeing seeds sprout, an astronomer's wonder at discovering a new star. Each sample was added to the bowl, where they mingled with the archivist's own memory, colors shifting and blending like watercolors on wet paper. The composite began to take shape, not random, not chaotic, but guided by the archivist's newly discovered understanding of what Nico needed. Not the absence of the father, but his presence transformed. Not memories of loss, but possibilities of connection. Not the past preserved in perfect, painful clarity, but the past as foundation for a future. When the mixture reached a certain luminosity, pulsing with gentle blue-gold light, the archivist reached for one final ingredient, one they had never before handled directly. From a separate chamber, accessible only through specialized instruments, they called forth a dream that had been in the archive longer than almost any other, the universal human dream of reunion. This dream existed in countless variations across cultures and eras, but its essence remained constant, the profound relief and joy of finding what was thought lost, of reconnection after separation. It appeared as a thread of pure gold, humming with harmonics too complex for human ears to detect. With infinite care, the archivist wove this thread through the mixture in the bowl. As it integrated, the entire composition changed, becoming more than the sum of its parts, a dream unlike any that had formed naturally, yet built from elements fundamental to human experience. The archivist lifted the bowl, now containing something that shimmered and pulsed with life. They carried it to the empty space on the shelf where Nico's dreams should have been, and with a gesture that was part blessing and part release, transferred the contents into a jar that materialized at their touch. The jar glowed with soft, steady light, not the sharp brightness of most dreams, but something gentler like dawn through sea fog. Within it, shapes formed and dissolved, a flower shop in the sky, stars arranged in familiar constellations, hands reaching toward each other across space. The archivist labeled the jar not with Nico's constellation alone, but with a new designation never before used in the archive's perfect system: given rather than collected. They stood for a moment, contemplating what they had done. It was unprecedented, possibly against the fundamental rules that governed their existence. Yet it felt right, necessary. As if the archive itself had evolved through the archivist's time on Earth, expanding to include not just preservation, but restoration, not just collection, but gift. With the newly created dream secure in its jar, the archivist prepared to descend once more. But as they turned to leave, they noticed something unexpected: a flickering light from another section of the archive, a shelf dedicated to dreams from a different part of Earth. Moving closer, they saw a jar pulsing with dim, irregular light. The dream within was struggling, fading, another anomaly, though different from Nico's. Without hesitation, the archivist reached for a small satchel hanging on a nearby pillar and began filling it with items collected during their time on Earth: a seashell, a flower petal, a ribbon from Clara's shop, a smooth stone from the beach. Small things, earth things, objects of substance and memory. These would come with them on their next journey, the archivist decided. After Nico, there would be other children, other dreams requiring intervention rather than mere collection. The archive and the archivists themselves were changing, adapting to a universe more complex than their original design had anticipated. But first, Nico. The archivist descended once more through clouds and atmosphere, the jar of crafted dream cradled carefully in their hands. Night had deepened over the small coastal town, most windows now dark, streets empty. In Clara and Nico's apartment above the flower shop, all was quiet. The archivist moved to Nico's bedside, observing the child's sleep. The barrier was still there, but weaker now, fatigue and natural human need for dreams beginning to erode its edges. The archivist raised the jar, which glowed softly in the darkness of the room, and with gentle deliberation released its contents. The crafted dream flowed from the jar like water, like light, surrounding Nico in a gentle mist of possibility. It didn't force its way past the child's defenses, but waited, patient, offering rather than demanding. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the barrier thinned, allowed tendrils of the dream to enter. The archivist watched as Nico's expression changed in sleep, tension releasing, breaths deepening. They sensed the dream taking hold, unfolding in the child's mind. Not memories of what was lost, but visions of what might be, a flower shop among stars, where gravity was gentle enough to float between blooms, constellations that formed pictures when connected, telling stories of earth and sky, warmth like a hand on a shoulder, presence without specific form. And yes, the father was there, but not as a painful absence. Instead, he appeared as he had in Nico's drawing, among the archive's shelves, a guardian of memories, watching over not just his own jar, but all of them, part of the vast pattern that connected all dreamers. The archivist remained until morning light began to filter through the curtains, ensuring the dream completed its cycle naturally. As Nico began to stir, they withdrew, becoming invisible once more, but remained in the room, curious to observe the aftermath of their intervention. Nico opened their eyes slowly, blinking up at the ceiling. Then, with sudden energy, they sat up, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. The archivist noted immediate differences: colour in the child's cheeks, brightness in their eyes, a subtle but unmistakable change in their energy. When Clara called from the kitchen, Nico responded with a clear "coming" and hurried to dress. The drawing remained on the windowsill, but the stone that had weighed it down was now placed beside it, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. During breakfast, Clara noticed the change immediately. "You look rested," she said, studying Nico's face. "Did you sleep well?" Nico nodded, taking a bite of toast. "I had a dream," they said after a moment, voice neutral but not pained. Clara's hand paused in the act of pouring coffee. "Oh," she said carefully, clearly trying to sound casual. "What about Dad?" Nico said simply. "But not like before. He was working in a special place, with stars and special bottles for keeping things safe." Clara set down the coffee pot. "And how did that feel, seeing him?" Nico considered this, head tilted slightly. "Okay," they said finally. "Not too sad. He looked happy there, like he had an important job." Clara reached across the table, squeezing Nico's hand briefly. "That sounds like a nice dream." After breakfast, as they prepared to leave for school, Nico paused beside the mysterious flower arrangement that had appeared days earlier. "I think our ghost is friendly," they said decisively. "I think they're a helper." Clara smiled, zipping up Nico's jacket. "I think you're right." The archivist followed them outside, watching as they walked hand in hand down the street, Nico talking more animatedly than at any point since the archivist's arrival. The child paused once to look back at the flower shop, eyes scanning windows and doorway as if searching for something or someone. Then with a small smile, Nico turned and continued towards school, steps lighter than before. Chapter 6. Sky Between Petals. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. In the days that followed, Nico began to dream regularly, not every night, but often enough that the empty space in the archive gradually filled with new glowing jars. These dreams weren't like the ones before the loss. They carried a different quality, a luminescence that reflected their unusual origin. The archivist collected them as was their duty, but with new awareness, handling each with particular care. On Earth, the changes manifested in countless small ways. Nico began to speak more, not just to Clara, but to classmates, teachers, customers in the flower shop. The child's drawings expanded beyond stars and archive vessels to include scenes from school, sketches of the cat, portraits of Clara arranging flowers. One afternoon, Nico even ventured to draw the father, not as he appeared in dreams, guardian of celestial memories, but as he must have been in life, laughing, one hand ruffling Nico's hair, the other holding a watering can among flowers. Clara found this drawing on the refrigerator one morning and stood before it for a long time, one hand pressed to her mouth. When Nico entered the kitchen, she pulled them into a tight embrace. "It's really good," she said finally, voice slightly muffled against Nico's hair. "You captured his smile perfectly." "I'm trying to remember the good things," Nico said. "Like you said." The archivist observed these moments from the periphery, their presence in the household now so familiar that both Clara and Nico had unconsciously adjusted to it. Clara attributed the subtle signs of another presence, straightened books, mysteriously watered plants, the continued appearance of small flower arrangements, to their friendly ghost, a concept that seemed to comfort rather than frighten her. Nico, more perceptive, occasionally addressed comments or questions to empty corners of rooms, as if aware that someone was listening. One evening, as Clara prepared dinner, Nico sat at the kitchen table drawing with unusual concentration. The archivist, curious, drifted closer. The page revealed a scene of remarkable detail and imagination. The flower shop, rendered accurately in its dimensions and features, but transported to the sky. Clouds formed its foundation, stars glittered between buckets of blooms. Clara appeared behind the counter, arranging a bouquet of what looked like small moons and comets, while a tall, misty figure with diamond-like eyes helped her, holding spools of starlight instead of ribbon. "That's wonderful, Nico," Clara said, glancing over from the stove. "Is that our shop?" "It's our shop if it was in the sky," Nico explained. "And that's you." They pointed to the figure behind the counter. "And that's Dad," indicating a constellation that formed a man's face in the background, watching over the scene. "And that's our helper," pointing to the misty figure. The archivist felt something unusual in their chest, a warmth, an expansion. "Our helper?" Clara asked, stirring the pot of soup. "The one who arranges flowers sometimes and fixes things," Nico said matter-of-factly. "I think they're from the sky. I see them in my dreams." Clara smiled indulgently. "Well, they're welcome any time. The ribbon drawer has never been so organized." Later that night, after Nico had gone to bed, the archivist found Clara sitting alone at the kitchen table, a photo album open before her. The pages displayed images of the man from Nico's drawings, Nico's father, Clara's brother, in various stages of life. As a boy with Clara, both gap-toothed and grinning, as a teenager holding a trophy, as a young man on his wedding day, and, finally, as a father himself, holding infant Nico with an expression of wonder. "It's been 11 weeks, Clara said softly to the empty room, her finger tracing the outline of her brother's face in the photograph. "The grief counselor says Nico is doing better than expected, making progress." She closed the album gently. I think she's right. Something's changed. She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened street below. I don't know if you're real, she continued, her words clearly directed at their ghost, at the archivist. Or if you're just a story Nico and I made up to comfort ourselves. But if you are out there, thank you. For whatever you did, that helped. The archivist, moved by this acknowledgement, allowed themselves to become slightly visible, just a shimmer in the air near the refrigerator, a subtle disturbance of light. Clara turned, catching the movement from the corner of her eye. Her breath caught, but she didn't appear frightened. "Oh," she said simply. Then with a small, uncertain smile, "Would you like some tea?" The archivist, unable to manifest fully enough to respond verbally, caused the small, succulent plant on the windowsill to turn slightly toward Clara. An answer, an acknowledgement. Clara laughed softly, the sound bright with surprise and wonder. "I'll take that as a yes." She moved to fill the kettle. "I don't suppose you can tell me your name, or what you are?" She paused, watching the air where the archivist hovered. "Can you understand me?" The archivist caused a pencil on the counter to roll toward her, once for yes. "Remarkable," Clara whispered. They spent an hour in this strange, one-sided conversation, Clara asking questions, the archivist answering through small movements of objects, once for yes, twice for no, more complex arrangements of items for nuanced responses. The archivist couldn't explain their true nature or purpose, but managed to convey that they were a benevolent presence, that they had been helping Nico, that they would soon depart. At this last revelation, Clara looked disappointed. "I understand," she said finally. "But know that you're welcome here, whenever you wish to return." She hesitated, then added, "Nico believes you're connected to their father somehow, that you're both watching over us. I don't know if that's true, but it brings comfort." The archivist considered this belief, inaccurate in its specifics, yet profound in its emotional truth. They caused the small potted lavender plant to release a burst of scent into the air, neither yes nor no, but acknowledgement of something beyond simple answers. Clara smiled, interpreting correctly. "Some things don't need explanation," she agreed, "just acceptance." That night, as Nico slept peacefully, dreams flowing naturally now without the archivist's intervention, they made preparations to leave. Their anomaly was resolved, balance was restored. The archive would have its complete collection once more. Yet the archivist found themselves reluctant to depart, drawn to these humans and their small, meaningful lives in ways they had never anticipated. They spent a final hour in Nico's room, watching the child dream. Tonight's dream was especially vivid, a journey through a garden in the sky where Nico and Clara planted stars that grew into flowers, while the father watched from a distance, smiling encouragement. The archivist appeared in this dream too, helping to water the strange blooms with light from silver watering cans. As dawn approached, the archivist placed a gift on Nico's bedside table, a small jar made from what appeared to be solid moonlight. Unlike the archive's vessels, this one wasn't for collection, but for creation. Inside, tiny motes of light drifted like fireflies, raw material for dreams, should Nico ever need them. Beside it, they left a note written in script that shimmered and shifted, legible, but clearly not of Earth. Dreams are not just memories of what was, but seeds of what might be. Plant them carefully. I will watch over them, and you from above. Their task complete, the archivist moved to the window, looking out at the town now touched with the first light of day. In the archive, they had observed countless dawns from above, the progression of light across continents, the geometric patterns of shadow retreating across land masses. But they had never before appreciated the specific quality of morning light in one small place, how it turned the sea to hammered gold, how it caught in dewdrops on Clara's window boxes, how it gradually filled the quiet streets with colour and possibility. They would carry this knowledge back to the archive, not as data to be catalogued, but as experience to be integrated, changing them in ways they were only beginning to understand. With one last look at the sleeping child, the archivist released their earthly form, becoming once more a being of light and purpose. They ascended through layers of atmosphere, through cloud and wind and thinning air, until the archive appeared before them, familiar yet somehow changed, as they themselves had been changed. Chapter 7, The Archive Breathes. The archivist returned to the archive with new awareness, as if seeing it for the first time. What had once seemed perfect in its stillness now felt incomplete, beautiful but static, vast but isolated. They moved through the endless shelves, observing the millions of glowing vessels with different eyes, understanding now that each jar contained not just patterns of thought, but fragments of lives, connections, emotions. For the first time, the archivist noticed how the archive itself responded to their altered perception. The quality of light seemed warmer, less stark. The silence felt less absolute, now underlaid with subtle harmonics, almost like the distant sound of the sea they had come to know on Earth. Even the vessels containing dreams appeared different, their contents more vibrant, more distinct from one another. Or perhaps it wasn't the archive that had changed, but the archivists themselves. They approached the section where Nico's dreams were stored, now filled with new vessels glowing with that distinctive luminescence, part natural dream, part crafted intervention. The archivist lifted one jar, studying the patterns within. Unlike ordinary dreams, which generally followed recognizable structures, these hybrid creations contained unusual combinations, earth and sky intermingled, memory and imagination coexisting, lost transformed into presence. The archivist placed the jar back on its shelf, then noticed something unprecedented. Where their hand had touched the vessel, a faint impression remained, a subtle warmth, a slight change in the jar's luminosity. They examined their own hands with wonder. Previously transparent and ethereal, they now appeared slightly more substantial, with minute traces of earth still clinging to them. A tiny grain of sand trapped beneath a fingernail, the faintest residue of flower pollen on a palm. These changes should have alarmed them, evidence of contamination, of deviation from the archive's perfect equilibrium. Instead, the archivist felt only curiosity and a strange satisfaction, as if they had been incomplete before and were now moving toward wholeness. They returned to their instruments, the tools of their eternal work. The ledger opened at their touch, displaying patterns of active dreamers across Earth. The archivist scanned these constellations with new perception, noticing not just individual patterns, but connections between them, how one dreamer's patterns influenced another's, how collective events created ripples across entire regions, how some dreams seemed to answer others across vast distances. As they observed these intricate networks, the archivist's attention was drawn to a different section of the ledger, a page they had glimpsed just before their departure. The constellation there pulsed weakly, irregularly, indicating another dreamer in distress. Not an absence of dreams like Nico's case, but dreams growing progressively dimmer, less substantial. The archivist consulted the location, another coastal town thousands of miles from Nico's, where another child struggled with dreams that were fading rather than vanishing. They accessed the corresponding shelf, finding jars that had once glowed brightly, but now flickered like dying embers. Without hesitation, the archivist reached for the satchel they had prepared, the collection of small earth treasures. They held these objects not as specimens to be studied, but as tools, materials for a new kind of work. Each item carried specific qualities. The seashell held echoes of waves and wind. The flower petal contained concentrated life and beauty. The ribbon from Clara's shop bore traces of human creativity. The smooth stone from the beach embodied patience and endurance. The archivist laid these items on their work table alongside the traditional instruments of dream collection. Then, with deliberate care, they adjusted the classification marker on Nico's latest dream jar, changing its designation from recovered to given. This was more than a semantic distinction. It represented a fundamental shift in the archivist's understanding of their purpose. They had been created to collect and preserve, operating on the assumption that dreams were finite resources requiring conservation. But their time on Earth had revealed something different. Dreams were not just artifacts to be archived, but living connections that could be restored, reinforced, even created where they had ceased to exist. The archivist lifted the shell to their ear, listening to its oceanic whisper. They had once believed that their role was simply to maintain the archive's perfect balance. Now they understood that true balance wasn't static, but dynamic, not an absence of change, but an ongoing process of renewal. They placed the shell back in the satchel alongside the other Earth treasures, preparing for another descent. The flickering dream light from that distant child called to them with newfound urgency, not just an anomaly to be corrected, but a being in need of connection, of intervention, of presence. As the archivist moved toward the descent platform, they noticed other changes in the archive. The vessels on nearby shelves seemed to pulse in subtle synchronicity with their movements, as if responding to the archivist's new, embodied awareness. The very air seemed more vibrant, carrying currents and eddies like the atmosphere of Earth, rather than the perfect, motionless medium it had always been. The archive was breathing. Before stepping onto the platform, the archivist paused, turning to look back at the endless expanse that had been their solitary domain for countless cycles of time. They had never before thought of the archive as lonely. It simply was what it was, perfect in its isolation, complete in its purpose. But now, having experienced the messy, interconnected warmth of human existence, they recognized the solitude of this place for what it was. Perhaps that too would change, with time and with new understanding. Perhaps the archive itself was evolving, becoming less a repository and more a nexus, a living intersection between the realm of dreams and the realm of waking life. The archivist stepped onto the platform, satchel in hand. As it began to descend, they caught a final glimpse of Nico's dream vessels glowing on their shelf, not just preserved, but alive, continuing to evolve even within their containers. And beside them, a space had appeared, seemingly of its own accord, an empty spot just large enough for a small collection of new vessels, waiting to be filled with dreams yet to be encountered, yet to be shaped, yet to be given. The platform broke through the archive's floor, carrying the archivist downward toward Earth once more. This time, the sensation of compression and solidity was not uncomfortable, but welcome, a return to something newly familiar, newly precious. They closed their eyes, feeling the layers of cosmos pass around them, sensing the approaching warmth of atmosphere, the embrace of clouds, the pull of gravity. Somewhere below, a child's dreams flickered, waiting. And beyond that child, there would be others, dreams to mend, connections to restore, balances to maintain not through distance, but through presence. The archivist descended, trailing stardust in their wake, changed and changing still, no longer merely collector and keeper, but now also creator and gift-giver. Above them, the archive continued its own transformation, breathing in gentle rhythm with the dreams it housed, its perfect stasis, giving way to something more complex, more difficult, and infinitely more alive. And far away, in a small room above a flower shop by the sea, Nico woke to find a jar of moonlight on the bedside table. The child lifted it carefully, watching the motes of light swirl within, reading the shimmering note with wonder and recognition. Then, smiling, Nico placed the jar on the windowsill where the stars would find it when night returned. "Thank you," the child whispered to the empty air, to the watching sky. "Come back someday." The words travelled upward, carried on currents of air and intention, beyond clouds and atmosphere, into the vast expanse where the archive floated among constellations. They reached the newly formed space on the shelf beside Nico's dream vessels, a space reserved for future connections, for returns, for possibilities not yet dreamed but already taking shape. And there they remained, not as sound but as promise, glowing softly with their own distinct light. The end.